We're back from the second MOT in my ownership, and it is a fail. Now, it's not the doors, it is primarily these issues. There's a couple of little holes right where the pinch weld is on the sill, all the way down the driver's side. That's not that bad to repair, providing when I clean things back, it's not a can of worms situation. What's slightly more problematic is the handbrake cable there snapped while it was on the rollers, and I do have a handbrake cable that I could fit. It's not a job I particularly enjoy, so I'm not sure I want to do that. In addition, the front brakes, this one is on me, I will stick my hand up on this one, are just a little bit too low. And I did recently have the low brake light flashing on the dash, which is commonly the little wires to it, and I'd given them a wiggle and the light went out, but actually the pads have just got a little bit too low, so I need to replace those. That job's not so bad, I've got the parts for that, we can do that. But there's more. It also managed to fail on emissions, but then I think that's probably because I drove the car straight there. I didn't warm it up beforehand like I normally do. There's no catalytic converter on this car, it's too old for that, and it's on a carburetor. So if need be, I can always lean it off a bit. But I think it's just that it was cold. I have another little bit of rust here, which I didn't know about. It looks like there was some filler that had lifted. I did this repair on the other side, and it's just where the bottom of the wing bolts on, so I know roughly what to expect there. It shouldn't be too bad. And there's one more bit of rust. They've not chalked this one, but that's the little bit at the end of the sill. I thought this was going to be a lot worse for access, but that's not too bad, I can fix that. Another item was the brake hose here, which is cable tied. It's a bit tricky to show you, there you go. It's cable tied, and that was marked down as the cable tie doing some damage to the hose, so I have to replace that hose. It does look very, very long, but that shouldn't be... Oh, it's going to be a nightmare, isn't it? So now I need to figure out whether or not I'm going to bother repairing this. I do need the money from the sale of this car. Now, by the time you watch this video, it will have probably already had its fate decided. You might not get my best camera work on this one because, well, it's not that easy to record when you're rolling around on the drive. I have got to replace this cable here, but I don't have to replace this section or this section here, because the main cable has snapped right here, as you can see. I should be able to unhook this from this little block. The same here, this oily mess. And then I think I disconnect here, and I just need to figure out how it feeds through here to the front of the car. It goes through a bracket and then back around here and over there somewhere, so we'll see. Oh, look, there's another one of those locking block things there, so hopefully I can just disconnect this one here, pop this whole cable off and pop the new one on, and it should be okay. It's got a lot of greasy gunge on it, which is what hid this problem from me. I was totally unaware that that was so weak, but yeah, can't argue with that one. The other thing we can see under here a bit better, now that I've got it on stands, is that little hole there, which really isn't that bad, and access is actually quite good. The jacking point itself is in good shape. There's a little bit of surface dusty rust just from the underseal not being there, so I can top that up while I'm under here. But honestly, the underneath of this car is actually pretty good, especially given the mileage and the reputation. So I'm pretty pleased about that. This is the replacement cable. It's not a new one, it's a good used one. And the bit that snapped on the old one on the car is this section here. So it looks like it rotted the cable out there, and then when it was pulled under tension, it's just snapped it. It was probably going for a while, couldn't be seen under all the gunge. So that's the bit I need to disconnect, because the passenger side handbrake cable that goes to the drum connects here and shoots off that way. And then this end, there's a little guide there, and that is what goes in the block for the driver's side handbrake cable. These are all various guides to go through the brackets, to stop it chafing, and this is the piece that's the head of the fuel tank. Now, the cable does keep going to an eyelet here, but I think I'm going to just try and split this piece here so that I can just disconnect at that point. I should be able to shove this forwards and lever it out of this little bracket. And I finally got it. This was not a fun job. I couldn't record it because, well, there's just no space. But to explain what I did, vice grips on this one, not so tight that it squashes it, but just enough to hold it, and then some grippy pliers on here. This cable is sacrificial since we're replacing it, and just twisted it until this nubbin started to move in that socket. And then very carefully keep doing that, pushing with a screwdriver until it all comes free. The trouble is, I would have liked to use some heat, but this is the fuel tank, and yeah, I just didn't fancy that. Now we've got that bit, this cable should drag back through this bracket here. I've cut off the cable tie that was holding on this brake hose, which is too long. I can't see the damage they mentioned on it, but I won't disagree that it is too long. I mean, look how close that is to the exhaust pipe. Not great. So we'll pull back through here, which will take all of this through to the back of the car somehow. I'm not sure about this junction, so it might be one of those where you thread some of it back that way and then some from the back of the car to the front. Not sure. I unbolted this, which holds the cable in place, which gave me the slack I needed, and I just need to do this one. Pat's just got back with hopefully a new ignition source for my gas. And we've got the last bit out. This was probably the most difficult bit to get out of the lot, because there's not really much to grab onto. You can see where the cable's just gotten weak and thin and snapped. Happily, the replacement cable is the same, so I don't have that concern. The only difference is this block, which screws onto the beam that runs across the back of the car, the axle, is not on this cable. Instead, we've got this, and I think this is supposed to go into a little bracket on the back, and I think this has been added by the first owner, because it used the same kind of Allen bolt that I've been finding all over the car when things have been repaired. So I don't think we'll put that back on. I think this actually just clips into the bracket to serve as a cable guide. Sorry I can't show you much in the way of action shots here. It's tricky to film. But yeah, the cable threads through from the back through that hole, and there's another hole further on which is smaller. The plasticky rubbery things on there serve as things to prevent chafing and to stop the cable pulling too far forwards. The block that was on here, as I suspected, this does clip into this little bracket. It was bent ever so slightly. Straightened it out, that's pushed in lovely, nice tight fit. So I won't refit that block, I'll just leave that as it is. And then this cable, of course, will connect over there, and this little nubbin of a cable will connect here. I'm just leaving this loose at the back end for now. I want to connect the front of the cable first, which is just around that corner there, because I think that's going to be a little bit harder to do if I connect up the back end here. And at the back end I can always, if I have to, which I don't want to, go into the drums and disconnect things if it comes to it, but hopefully I shan't have to do that. We shall see. You ready?
Yes.
Okay, now that we've got the front end connected, which I couldn't show you, I can show you the back because I have a camera person, thank you Pat. And what you do is you pull the cable in so it slots in the socket like that, and then pull. And that should be also how easy these come apart, but they obviously never do, because you should be able to just do that. And that's that one done. We've got one more to connect, and then hopefully that's the handbrake cable done. It is done. I've figured out the best way to do this, at least for my situation, was to connect the thing there and the thing there, and disconnect the one ahead of the fuel tank that's way up there. I don't want to crawl under the car right now. With the cable slacked off, remember that's the bit up there that has the turny dial on it, there was enough play to get everything done, and then I could get everything reconnected, put some tension back on the cable, and we're good. Now, as for balancing these, I don't know if I can, because I don't really have the tools and things, so I've best guessed it, and I will tell the MoT garage when it goes back in, please balance them. I will pay accordingly, but that is holding that. I can't turn that on the handbrake. And I've gone and left my car keys inside, but the handbrake is on. It's not sticking up a ridiculous amount, or a ridiculous amount of clicks. And that's the hopefully worst job done on the car. Now I can move on to doing the welding work. I'll do the bit underneath while it's on the stands, and I might do this while it's on the stands as well, just because it's a bit easier. The trouble is today, the weather is a little bit changeable, so I don't want to risk dragging the welder out just yet for this one. The weather cleared up, at least for now, so I'm going to see if I can get these jobs done. I'm going to start with the passenger inner sill. There's two small patches. I can't really bring you in to film it. Let me explain why. There isn't a great deal of room under here, so there's nowhere for me to put you while I work. So I'm just going to blitz through these two areas and get them sorted. So we have one small piece back here, which needs a little patch, and another one up there. So I'll clean these back, straighten everything out, and very quickly put a couple of repairs on there, and then we'll underseal all of this as a, where are we? There's a sill drain point here, so the actual rust is you know, it's barely big enough to even put my finger in there, which is good in a way, but this is an awkward space to work in. Spent a bit of time cutting out all my patches. It's all a bit rough and ready, I'm afraid. There's only so much I can do here. Really ideally I should be pulling this outer sill off and replacing the whole thing, as I mentioned before, but it's not on the cards for this. I just need this through the MoT and good enough for the next owner to do what they want to do with it, because yeah, I'm not keeping hold of this car. All the patches in, we're not dressed back on anything yet. You can see all the patches are just a little bit long on the bottom here, and that's on purpose. I like to leave them slightly too big so I can trim them back to get a nicer, tidier finish when we're done. So I'm going to leave all this to cool down, and then I can clean it up and see if there's any pinholes I need to catch, and we can tidy up these edges, get it undersealed, and cross that one off the list. While I wait for the seam sealer to dry so I can do the next and final stage on the other repairs, this repair is proving to be a little bit problematic already, which is that this little bolt here will not come undone. It is rusted to a size that doesn't match any of my sockets, and it's what holds the bottom of the wing on. Now I don't want to be doing a can of worms situation here where I pop this off and find more problems. So I think I'm just going to flat wheel, see what I'm left with, because the hole itself is really small. Look, it's not even as big as my thumb. I know they don't always stay like that when you clean them back, but yeah, it's just a bit annoying, this one. somebody has been here before. There is a line of welding there, there's some filler. I tried getting some heat on, but there's a plastic arch liner here, so to get any heat in here I've got to pull the arch liner out, the mud flap off. Then if I can get the wing off, I'm probably going to destroy this bolt in the process. That might destroy the captive nut. This is one of those pick your battles. I've cleaned it up about as well as I can with the tools I have, and I'm just going to have to overplate this. Now here it's still thick enough that I can actually just weld that hole up. This one will need a small patch, and that's how I'm going to deal with it. But I'm not going to try and hide this. I'm going to make it obvious that there's been a patch there, so whoever sees the car can see, you know, there's work needed there. If I were keeping the car long term, absolutely I would spend the few days needed probably to strip all of this down and repair it properly. I'd put new outer sills on and all the rest of it, but sometimes you really do have to pick your battles, and I think just an overpatch here, a tiny one, is the most sensible course of action. Well, the seam sealer went on a bit thicker than I intended there and covered up the entire repair, but never mind, it's repaired, it's sealed, it's as good as it needs to be for this point in its life. And that's all the welding done for the MoT now. I just need to paint and underseal all of this to tidy it up. And it's not all the welding done. I am intending to get these door bottoms repaired before it goes. That's a bigger job than I want to get into today, because, well, I still haven't figured out how I'm going to do these front edges, especially now I know I can't really get this wing off. So that's going to be interesting. While I wait for this to dry, I'm going to do the hoses at the back, or rather the one hose at the back, and I am really hoping that it doesn't fight me or be horrible. I don't want a repeat of the Princess. I don't think these were done that long ago, because this union here is just coming undone. What a massive relief. It is quite tricky to film under here, which is why I haven't been, but once we have this union off, there's a clip here which holds the hose in, and the hoses are a little bit unusual on the ends, so I'm going to have to make sure I save the clip. But this might go well. What a relief that will be. For all this had the rust advisories, well, fails rather, the underside of this car is actually in very good shape. The underseal's in very good condition, and apart from the usual wear and tear of nearly 40 years of use, it's pretty good. The axle beam here is devoid of most of its paint, that's fairly normal. Same thing with the hubs and struts, it's just surface rust really. It's not anything to be worried about. Up here, where the repairs were done, that's all undersealed again, no more rusty holes. That should be okay for a bit. I've done the jacking point as well. Over on this side, it's a little tricky to see, but I've done all of the inside of the sill, the jacking point, anywhere where I disturbed the finish, really. And we have a smut on the screen, I wonder what that is. Up at the front, this repair that I'm, you know, not my finest work, but it's done. That's all undersealed as well. And that sill also looks a lot tidier for the repairs that have been done there. So I'm okay with it. I mean, they're always going to be sort of MoT standard, but there are other patches on here from before I got the car. So I'm happy enough that my repairs sort of blend in. A new outer sill, as I've said, would be the best solution here. The inner sill seems to be in pretty good shape. The floors are pretty good. It's just the outer sill that's starting to go on the bottom edge. And it just means that over the years, more and more of these patches will be required. So just replacing the whole thing makes more sense. At the back, obviously, we've got the handbrake cable that I replaced. and we have the new hose, which is considerably shorter than the old one. Doesn't need cable tying out the way or anything like that, so I'm quite happy about that. The interesting thing is this clip up here, which holds this in, there isn't one on the other side. Instead, let's see if I can show you. Instead, on this side there's a sort of hose clamp that's being used by somebody in the past. It does the job. It holds, you know, holds everything nice and secure, but it wasn't a problem at the MoT. Hopefully it won't be a problem when I re-present for the retest. But at least that was an easy fix. Next thing to do is up at the front for another day, not today, I've done enough, is the front brakes. I just need to put new discs and pads on and then bleed the brakes to make sure everything's fine. And we should be good to go. Here's the rear brake hose. This is the one that failed the MoT, and this is the replacement, and you can see just how much too long this one is. I'm not entirely sure what it's from. The damage, which I couldn't see until I got it off, is just here where it had been cable tied. It was just chafing through, so yeah, that's fair. And these ones do look better on the car than this big long wiggly one that was under there. The other side looks perfectly fine, so I'm not replacing it, but I will put this one in the spare stash since it is perfectly fine and brand new. Well, that could have been worse. I've got one side done, so that's new pads and new discs. The old pads are somewhere. They are a little bit glazed looking, and the disc that came off, you know, it's not super, but it's not terrible either. It's not cracked or anything, so they're still okay, but maybe the other side's worse. I've cleaned all this off with some cleaner just to get that protective film off that they have on, and of course we have the nice new pads in there. Still have the anti-squirrel shim. They're not too bad to do. These are not terrible, but I haven't refurbished the caliper. There's no point me going to that kind of level here. It's just everything's moving, everything's fine, and I think that will do. I will show you in more detail the other side. I wanted to do this side first just to see how difficult or easy a job it was, and then I could do the other side and feel a bit more confident that I at least knew slightly what I was doing. Here we are. This is the driver's front. Just pop the wheel off. Car's up on an axle stand, and it's worth noting on the Maestro that you have this extra set of wires here, because you've only got the wear pad warning indicator on this side. You don't have it on the passenger side. I don't know why, it's just how it is. So you do need to disconnect that, and from what I did on the other side, I learned that it's best to undo the slider pin here before you start going in to do everything else, because it's really very difficult to undo that slider pin when everything's apart. Filming this might be a little bit tricky, again because lack of space. It's just me on my Todd. But for the slider pin down here, this is a 17mm and this is a 13mm, and this little bolt actually unscrews from the slider pin, and that's the one that you need to do kind of first. Also, you have the plug up here, which might be a two-handed one to unplug that. I thought it would unplug straight away, but it looks like it's got a little latching mechanism. So I'll piddle about with that and get that out, and then we'll have a look at the next job so that we can get the disc done first, because I need to do the disc before I do the pads. I tried the usual methods, tappy tap with a hammer and spanner, this stuff which somebody gave me, which seems to be pretty good, not sponsored, and resorted to physics. breaker bar, got the top one undone, I've got the bottom one to do, and once that's off I can show you a bit easier what it is that we're actually undoing here. These are the bolts that I was getting out, and they were properly stuck in there, and they go down behind the caliper here. We do now have the caliper free, so I might actually just pull off. Nope. It's a little bit stuck because there's a bit of a lip on the edge of the disc here. So just very gently I might be being daft here, mightn't I? Because I can just spin this section off and then that would free up everything. Or maybe not, it all seems a bit stuck together. There we go. Right. So, what I was trying to show you and was struggling to is there are those two bolts I showed you go through the holder here into the back of the hub, and there's no access in here for me and tools and you, so I couldn't show you. Now that this is off, I'm just going to secure that. I'm just going to hang that up when I find my string. I need to get out these two screws here. Now on the other side they actually came out very well, so fingers crossed we'll have good luck this side too. Using my old-fashioned impact driver. The bit is the best fit I can find for these screws, and we'll just hope it goes okay. Oh, look at that. No penetrating fluid or anything. Haven't damaged the screws, which is good because new ones don't come with the disc. So I can reuse those. And then the disc simply comes off. And we can pop the new one on. Nothing fancy, no performance discs or anything. These are just from APEC, because that's what I found when I was looking. And it's important to use some sort of cleaner on the disc before you actually install your brakes, because they do have an oily film to stop flash rusting in storage, so it's always a good idea to do that. I've already done the back. That was easier to do off the car. And yeah, that will just stop them from contaminating the pads or anything like that. Pop the screws back in. Oh, and if you're wondering why I'm using this instead of the proper size screwdriver, this is the only bit I have this big, and it doesn't go in my other holders, and I don't have a regular screwdriver this big either. But there we go, that is one disc replaced. Now let's do the pads. This is the slider pin that I've undone, and that holds the carrier, so you can actually hinge that open like so, and then pop the brake pads out. This is the one with the actual wire built into it. I will admit that is very, very, very low. Yeah, the bit there is where the wire comes through from the other side. So that's why the light was flickering. It wasn't lying. The other side. There's also an anti-squeal shim, what's left of it. That might not survive being transferred, but we'll see. And I need to wind the caliper back in. Now in the book it does suggest loosening off the bleed nipples and pushing this back in. Unfortunately, they are a little bit crusty on here, so what I've opted to do instead is I've undone the cap on the brake fluid reservoir, and then I'll push this back in with a socket and a clamp. That way I'm not introducing any air in the system, and the excess fluid will just go back up into the reservoir where I need it to go. You do need to do this because otherwise you can't get the new pads in. They are quite a bit thicker than the ones we've taken out. And this is a bit of a pain to set up. Happily the piston wound back nice and smoothly using the socket and clamp trick, and this is the pad difference. So we're going to displace a bit of fluid here because that's where we were, and this is the new pad. So they were very definitely ready. This is a job I've been putting off because I don't enjoy doing brakes, and yeah, I really shouldn't have, so my bad. But I'm doing it now, so new owner will definitely benefit from some lovely new brakes on the front. First part of putting the calipers back on after doing the disc is the bolts here. These are the ones I couldn't show you. I'm laid under the car at the moment. And that will allow us to get the caliper with the pads, all that business, I can't brain, all slid back into place and done up properly. Now on the MoT it said, and I'll mention this while I'm under here, there is a oil leak front centre, and was not specific, and that's because yeah, I don't know where this is coming from. It's not very much, but it's an A series, so you know, it's not coming from the rocker gasket, which I've done, so I guess it's just coming from a worn out seal somewhere. It's now time to load up the caliper, and the one that has the warning wire goes on the back, and the one without goes on the front. They will need just a little tiny tappy tap just to seat them. And I've got the remains of the anti-squeal shim. I am going to put it on. I know it's not in great shape or anything, but yeah, it's there-ish. It might not even stay in place. Right, so what you do once they're in is you then hinge down the caliper half, and I hope you've got everything lined up. I think I'm going to have to omit this, unfortunately. I don't have a spare. It's a slightly tight fit because everything's brand new here. Just check as you go that things like the wire down here isn't snagged, that your slider pins are out the way. Right, and the really difficult bit, which is getting the slider pin here to line up. You can screw it in. Got it. Okay, that's all in place, so the last thing to do is just connect up the wire here. And that should be job done, I hope. Let's get the wheel back on and see if it actually works. Back on its wheels again, and we did displace quite a bit of fluid in here. I think I'm going to just drain a tiny bit of that out, because the maximum level is this mould line on the actual bottle, and it's a good bit above that. Hopefully I shan't need to bleed anything, because I've not really disturbed anything, but we'll see. I might have to. Well, they seem to work just fine, which I'm happy about. On the dash, there's the warning lights as there should be. So if I take the handbrake off, we're not getting the amber one down here flickering. But when I put the handbrake on, everything comes on like it should. If you're wondering why the revs are dipping up and down, it's because I've got my foot on the foot brake, so it's just putting a bit extra load on. The only thing left on the MOT list now was the emissions, and I think that was just because I'd driven the car straight to the garage cold, hadn't used it a lot in the week prior, and I think it was just running a little bit richer than it should be. So when I book the retest, I shall take it for a bit of a spin beforehand, get it warmed up, and hopefully that won't be an issue. Cars of this age, emissions are really generous, so it was quite surprising that it failed, especially since it's not giving me any indication that there's a problem anywhere. But yeah, I'm quite happy with that. The brakes feel perfectly fine. They do feel better than they did. Onwards.